Hello, and welcome back to Talking Shop, a series of fun conversations with consummate concert artists, composers, opera singers, and choreographers. I'm so thrilled to have as my guest today Sarah Moulton Faux. Sarah is a prominent opera singer and a masterful art song interpreter. Opera News has lauded her for her full silvery soprano. The Brooklyn Spectator has described her performances as mesmerizing, and the New York Classical Review has praised her pure intonation and excellent articulation. Her performances span opera's most famous heroines to contemporary works. She is an Opera America National Trustee Recognition Award winner for her work as co-president of the Board of American Opera Projects, a nonprofit organization at the forefront of developing new works and supporting contemporary composers. She has a particular interest in researching and promoting the work of female composers. She contributed to Marianna Martines, A Legacy of Her Own, which is a theatrical concert with ensemble pie that brought the 18th century Viennese composer's story to life. And her first album, Where Should This Music Go, or This Music Be, excuse me, Songs of Lola Williams, was an American prize winner. More recently, Sarah and world-renowned pianist Konstantin 𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒔 recorded previously undiscovered art songs composed by Yulia Weissberg Rimsky-Korsakov, the daughter-in-law of famed composer Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. The album, named Yulia, Forgotten Songs of Yulia Weissberg Rimsky-Korsakov, is available on all streaming platforms as well as in physical copies on Amazon. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you. I really can't wait to dive deep in one of my favorite subjects, and that's opera. So let's begin with the first question that I always ask my first-time guests. And what does being an opera singer and a lyrical theater singer mean to you on a personal level?
What it's meant to me has changed over time. I think when I first started out and growing up and just loving to sing and loving music, and it was a very personal experience, learning the craft of singing and the craft of performing. And then after getting some of those foundational skills under my belt, then now the purpose has expanded to wanting to bring the work of new composers, particularly women composers, to the forefront. And it feels not only powerful and important for me personally, but also that it is a service to the community and to the world, really, to help to bring this music and make it more prominent.
Of course, the part I love most about that is that you're championing female composers. Since I'm one of those.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I just, every artist answers this question differently, and I really love the different nuances, and I love that you were mentioned how it changes over time. Can we delve into that just a little bit deeper and just maybe give a little bit more depth into your earlier perspective? And then I think you told us a little bit more about your current perspective. Can you highlight the difference in that a little bit for us?
I think previously I didn't realize as a singer, as a soprano, the there were no limitations on my opportunities. If a song or an operatic role was written for soprano, it was written for soprano. Um, it was only later that I realized that certain opportunities that I had taken for granted as a performer were not available to other women composers or stage directors, executive directors, other aspects of the industry. That realization took longer, and when I did realize it, I wanted to do something to to further other women's work in the field.
I love that. So I love to hear people's stories. I love to hear how each person came to their musical life, what were those early influences? Was there one thing that just made you know that this was your life? This was what you were meant to do?
So I think it was my father's influence. He loved the opera. So when he was growing up in his teens and his 20s in New York City, he would go and see operas at the Met all the time. And he would regale me with stories. I think they called them two-steppers, that you would slip the doorman, the security guards at the entrance, you would slip them a five, and then you would go up to the grand tier level. And if there were, you would stand in the artist section, friends of the artist standing room section. And then if there were open seats, the ushers would come and bring you from that section, and you'd slip them a 10, and you would get a beautiful seat for the opera. So there was a whole community of people doing that at the time. This was back in the 70s. I think it's wonderful. I
I do
unfortunately
too.
I don't think it exists now with sort of tightened security, but it was I think a special time in the Mets history when this was going on. So actually, some of my first experiences was my father bringing me, and because all the people who had worked there for a long time remembered him, even though it wasn't, it had sort of died down in the 80s, that those are my first opera experiences, were going and getting these seats with my father.
I just think
And
that's glorious. Yeah.
um, and there was one time, I think I was 6, and he told my mother that he wanted to take me. They were doing Wagner's Ring Cycle, and he wanted to take me to Das Rheingold. And my mother said, she's 6 years old. How can you be taking her to Wagner? And so my mother said she wasn't going to go, and because she thought it was going to be a disaster. And so my father took me in, and my mother waited up for us to come home. And when when he came back, the story goes that he was holding me in his arms, and my mother goes, "How did it go?" And I flung open my arm and I said, "Rheingold, Rheingold, Rhine is gold." So, and I
Wonderful.
was singing it around the house for years to come. And I vividly do remember that experience of seeing Das Rheingold. It's really as my first opera, and absolutely loving it.
That's fantastic story. I love that. I know how much you must cherish that. That's just those are great memories, and gosh, what a wonderful early exposure. Um, I so I love your interpretation of art songs. I'm gonna veer to another topic just a little bit, and you remind me so much of Barbara Bonney. I have adored her voice for as long as I can remember, and I love singing arias, and I love hearing great sopranos sing arias. But there's something very special about the ability to sing art songs quite well, and I think it's an overlooked ability that isn't given nearly the credit that it is due. And you have that special something. I will just tell you, listening to the album that you and Constantine did, it really did mesmerize me. It just, I think part of it, probably is the writing of the art songs themselves, which is just masterful. But you do such a beautiful job of interpretation. And of course, I think you and Constantine were just the perfect duo for this. But what draws you to art songs, and how do you feel about them in compared to opera arias? And let's leave the theater part out just a little bit. We'll come back to that later. But what is the main contrast? What is the difference for you in singing art songs and opera arias?
Thank you so much for comparing my work to Barbara Bonney, because she is incredible, and she was absolutely one of the main influences in my work, particularly early on. So thank you.
That I knew there had to be some connection there. I thought
Yeah.
I'm not hearing this just randomly. There's got to be. I'm so glad to hear that.
So yeah, coming to art song also was a shift in perspective. Because when you go to conservatory, you're usually assigned art songs, and part of your recitals at conservatory end up being usually mostly art song and maybe one or two opera arias. But it took me a while to find my own perspective on art song as a genre. And people would say, well, you have to find the story within the song or the greater story. But it took a while for that to click. I honestly found it so much easier to connect with opera and singing an operatic role. You have sort of sets and costume and your collaborators, and to really connect with the character and find the through line through the piece. And I struggled with art song to have that same level of connection, because it's you're sort of stripped bare. It's you and the piano, and there are no trappings of costume and lights and orchestra to help for you to find it. You have to find it from a place within. And I think that took, I would say, just maturing as an artist to get to the point of being able to feel as close a connection with a song as I might with an operatic role.
And I also, art songs are also so much shorter. And it's like you have to get that entire story. It's almost like a vignette, I guess. I mean, this is kind of how I view it. It's like a vignette. And instead of part of the continuum of the opera, it's just a little vignette, and you have to get that whole story across in that one short space. And sometimes I think it's a little bit difficult to do that, because it's almost like some art songs seem to me just part of someone's thought process, part of a feeling at the time, or, which you have to realize that there's a bigger story around that. So I think that's what makes it such a difficult thing to do well. And so I just applaud you for that. It's just, to me, it's just very unusual to find someone who can do that very well. And the other thing is, we don't hear that many people performing art songs as much. Maybe that's a trend that's coming. I'd love to get your perspective on that. But we're also used to going to. But I love opera. I feel like opera is having a resurgence, and everyone loves to hear these roles. That we're also familiar with, and also the new operas. But what is your perspective on that? Do you think art songs are making a comeback or becoming a more prominent offering for people?
I do. I think that we are, certainly musicians and those who love music are interested in the historic aspect. I think we're interested in looking back in history at um, composers that may have been overlooked at the time. So, women composers, or just underrepresented composers in general. And oftentimes, for those composers, the art song was a more accessible way to enter the industry. So we can find those voices in art songs where they may never have had the opportunity to have a complete opera, and or a complete symphony, but we can find them in art song and in chamber music. So I do think there is interest, and that type of music is being programmed more and more.
Mhm.
And then in terms of the opera canon, we are in a golden age for American opera, and just the plethora of voices now entering that field and having opportunities to have complete works, is really incredible.
I've noticed that too, and it thrills my heart, honestly. I've sung my entire life and just fell in love with opera, and a quick story about my dad. When I was 18, he was not exactly an opera person, and my family was not very musical at all. And for my 18th birthday, he took me to the Met performance in our city. At that point, the Met auditions were there in the spring, and they would accompany those auditions with three performances. And that was back in the day when you dressed in gowns and everything, and it was really, really lovely. And that's coming back too. I see that so much among younger people, but that was a really, really special time, for me. I wanted to also let's here's art songs, opera arias. There's this middle category called the concert opera. I mean, concert aria, excuse me. Um, can you explain to us a little bit about what differentiates a concert aria from an art song and an opera aria?
So I haven't seen as many modern concert arias, which would be interesting.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, I think, oh, that's potentially something that perhaps composers would do. But when I think of a concert aria, I look to a composer like Mozart. So he wrote art songs, he wrote operas, and he had a huge body of concert arias as well. So they are outside, they're written in the style of an opera aria, but they are not within the context of an opera. So it's a standalone text, and it has an orchestral accompaniment, and it certainly could be inserted into an opera if the composer wanted to do that. But it's interesting now that you mention it that that could be something for the composers of today to experiment with.
Yeah, I love that. And one reason I ask is because I've written one vocal piece and it is a concert aria. So I just, I'd love for there to be a resurgence. I had done some research and saw that Mozart, is most known for those. But I just think there are all kinds of opportunities for things coming back in a different way these days. So thank you for your definition and review of that topic. Um, so going a little bit deeper into the opera side now, are there specific or particular roles that you have sung that are your favorites? Um, how do you, I know, you approach each one differently. And I heard another singer say the other day that every time she sings even a familiar role, she starts from scratch and really, redevelops that. What is your approach to that? And what are some of your favorite roles that you've sung?
So most of my standard operatic repertoire roles were pre-pandemic, and of course, my favorite was Violetta and La Traviata.
How
That
could
is
it
a
not be?
soprano's. That's a soprano's dream. It's like a sort of ascending the to the pinnacle of sort of the heights of everything it means. I think to be a, a soprano opera singer. The role is so vocally demanding and requires so much technically, but then it's also dramatically demanding as well, and you're on stage almost the whole time, and the emotional journey that the music and the text take you on, or that so I sort of feel like when I'm starting a performance of La Traviata, it's it's like it's like a marathon runner who knows the terrain that they have to travel, and there are markers along the way, and so I feel like I'm just setting out onto this path, and there is no other choice. I have to get to the end.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, so it's a combination of going along for the ride, but also being the one to make the ride and journey happen. So that's an amazing that was an amazing experience. I sang two productions of that. Um, But I loved other things. I sang Rosina and Barber of Seville and Susanna and The Marriage of Figaro, Adina in Elixir of Love. So lots of wonderful sort of vocal and dramatic gems.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, let's go a little bit into your musical theater side. How did that develop? Was it kind of a, did it kind of come along with? Was it a different interest that came later? And what do you enjoy about that in particular?
So do you mean musical theater in like sort of Broadway musical type
No,
thing?
well, I think, let's see.
Like lyric theater, like more of the contemporary opera that I've been doing?
I think that's probably what I'm referring to. I apologize. So I think your the first, when you contributed to the Mariana Martinez, the legacy of her own,
Oh, yes.
described as a theatrical concert. So
I see.
maybe
Yes,
that's more of what
I
I
see.
mean.
It's like
So set me
theater
straight
and
on this.
music.
Yes.
Mhm. So the Mariana Martinez project was really fascinating, and I was brought into it. Um, it's the main driver for that project is Edith Mechoulen Korman of Ensemble Pi. She's a pianist, and she has been working on the piano music of Mariana Martinez for many years now. Mariana Martinez was a contemporary of Mozart's. She was essentially the adopted daughter of Metastasio, a very famous librettist at the time, and he guided her musical training, and she had oratorios performed and chamber music and piano music, and she really had for an 18th century female composer had an incredible career and was quite brilliant. And so Edith had the concept of doing a staged version of sort of a play around the music of Mariana Martinez. So there was spoken dialogue, and then as well as Edith on the piano, and then I was the singer for that piece, and that was at the Sheen Center in New York. Um, that was the sort of the start of my really becoming interested in women composers in history. And that led to my first album, Where Should This Music Be? Songs of Lola Williams, which the Lola Williams was a Southern woman composer. She was sort of grew up in Great Depression era, and she had two choices. It was be a secretary or be a teacher, and that was it.
Yeah.
So she chose to be a teacher, and she ended up as a music teacher, even though she was an English major. But later in life, she was able to more fully devote herself to composition, and she loved Shakespeare. So she wrote all of these songs to Shakespeare texts. And the music was really beautiful. She had her own style, even though she was not formally trained.
Hmm.
And after she passed, she lived almost to be 100.
Wow.
Her family reached out to me to look at her sort of look at her body of work.
Hmm.
And most of it was handwritten manuscripts in boxes
Wow.
that were now in her son's basement.
So
So
not even published, really.
she had never been published.
Wow.
Um, so she was truly she'd had a few live performances of her work in her lifetime, but not published. And so she also had multiple versions, multiple handwritten versions of each song, but with no marking as to what came first, second, what was the final version.
Yeah.
So trying to, take 5 or 6 versions of a piece and to discern what was really, what is the most performance ready version was it was like a mystery and a puzzle. And when we would determine something, it was very exciting. It was like, oh, I think this is it. This is the version.
Yeah, yeah.
And that music is now, not only is it an album that's on Spotify and Apple Music, but also classical vocal reprints, their imprint, Claire Nan, which is specifically for women composers, published all of the music that we have on the album. So her work is now available.
That must be such a gratifying feeling to have, and I just love that you dig deep back into history and find these women because, we hear about, well, on the piano side, composers like, Clara Schumann and Fanny Mendelssohn, but we don't hear, and Florence Price, but we don't hear a lot of, or I haven't heard, maybe I just haven't been exposed to that many women composers who wrote, art songs and things like that. So I just love that you're doing this, and I think it's wonderful to introduce us, reintroduce, the world, or I guess actually introducing in the first part because they didn't get much introduction in the first place. So I really love that you're serving their art in that way, and that's one of the first things you mentioned, when I asked you that first question. Um, so let's progress to Yulia, and how much later was that? The beginning of that work, was it right after the first album, and how did that evolve? How did you get involved with Constantine? If you'll just kind of talk to us about that whole glorious process. I have loved all of your and Constantine's posts when that album, leading up to the album drop and after it. It's just been so exciting to kind of travel that, with you. So I'm just going to give you the floor and you just talk about whatever you'd like in that process.
So the Lola Williams album came out in 2019. And then we had sort of our 2020 start of the pandemic. And I was, I think my sort of what saved me during that time was making sure that I had daily practice time. Even though I didn't necessarily have a performance to prepare for, but I needed, for some people it was they had to go on a run or go to the gym, or their own personal gym, or bake bread or do those things, and I did a little bit of that too. But for me, it was the practice time,
Yeah.
and I was working on some music of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov,
Hmm.
and there was one line. I was doing just some very light background reading, not heavy research, just light. But there was one line that said Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov and his daughter-in-law, the composer Yulia Weissberg. That was
Wow.
it. And I thought, I didn't realize that Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov had a daughter-in-law who was a composer. I've never heard of her. I wonder if she wrote songs
Mhm.
or what she wrote. So I started to do some digging, and she had a Wikipedia page
Interesting.
and that gave some background on her life. And there were entries on her in famous women composers in history, famous Jewish composers in history. So her name was there, but I could not find any of her music. There was nothing on Spotify, nothing on Apple Music. There was one YouTube recording of a singer who had done one of her pieces and did say at the time, this is someone people should look at.
Mhm.
But that was it. It was just that one YouTube video. So I started to really do some digging, and I found a source by a musicologist, Susan Filler, and it was an annotated research bibliography of, it was Alma Mahler and her contemporaries, and they were four composers. It was Alma Mahler, Florence Price, and Julia Weissberg, and one other composer. But in the entries on Weissberg, there were all these question marks. Be like Opus 3 question mark question mark question mark. So I tried to find Susan Filler, couldn't find her to ask her more questions on her book. But there was one name in the special thanks section that sounded Russian. So it was Olga Panteleva. I thought, well, maybe I can find Olga. And so that's what I did. So I sort of searched social media, and it turned out that Dr. Olga Panteleva was at that time, an adjunct professor in Amsterdam.
Wow.
And this was all during the pandemic. So it was just from my practice studio up in, above the garage. So thankfully, Olga helped me because I did not speak Russian at the time. And so I spoke with her. I said what I was looking for, and she was able to locate in the Russian State Library a treasure trove of Julia Weissberg's published scores.
Oh my gosh.
So this was quite different than my Lola Williams project,
Mm-hmm.
because the more that I learned about Julia Weissberg, the more that I realized that she had had a thriving career in Russia prior to essentially prior to World War II.
Mm-hmm.
There was this, they call it the silver age of Russian arts, was in this period from the late 1800s up until the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918, was this thriving period for music, for writing. And Yulia had her training at the St. Petersburg Conservatory with Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov during that time period. And then she moved to Berlin, where she studied with Engelbert Humperdinck and Max Reger, and started publishing her music.
Wow. That's just such a fascinating story. So how did you decide which songs to include on the album? And obviously, you were looking for an accompanist, a collaborator. Let me correct that. What drew you to Constantine? Were you friends with him before all of this started? How did that occur?
So I knew that I how important, especially in art song, the collaborative process is with the pianist.
Mhm.
In To make an album, this is not the role of an accompanist. The chemistry and synergy between the singer and the pianist is paramount. And so I did not wish to make a mistake in that front. I really needed the right person. And so I looked at the work of several pianists when I was choosing choosing pianists for this, specifically for this project. And Constantine and I knew each other. We'd known each other for years, but we had never really collaborated on a project. And so I initially went to him more as a coaching. I said,
Mhm.
I'm sort of doing these songs in Russian, with can we work together?
Yeah.
But I did already have it in my mind that that he could potentially be the one.
Yeah.
And I was just struck. It was immediate, when I took the music to him, even when he was sight reading it, just to hear his choices just in the moment, I found it very inspiring. And so I think we both um, sort of walked away from that initial session realizing that we worked really well together, and had respect for each other and the way that we were interpreting the music. and that's how our collaboration started.
That's a wonderful story. And I've experienced Constantine's magic as well with one of my pieces, and it was just the most fabulous experience. I mean, the first read through, I was like, okay, wow, he's just amazing. Um, so we've talked about, I guess, the difference in the research. Well, I don't know that we have. Can you dig a little bit deeper into the research process for the first album and Lola Williams, and then the research process for Yulia? I guess, in that vein, um, maybe Yulia's work was more hidden, and then it's like you found this whole treasure trove, and then for Lola, it was a little bit different. Maybe it was a little bit more straightforward. Would you talk about just a little bit about the difference in those processes?
So with Lola Williams, it was really about the physical manuscripts and and flying up to Vermont. That was where the even though she was from North Carolina, that her her music was in boxes in a basement in Vermont. So I was diving into her handwritten manuscripts and also her writings and and putting it, and my goal was just to put it in a way that it would be available to future generations,
Yeah.
um, to preserve it. And then with Yulia, it was really the marvel of modern technology,
Yeah.
because I was not flying to Russia to go dig into an archive. I mean, I would have loved that experience. That would have been amazing. But I was able to do it through, you know, having someone contact the Russian State Library, and they just put it through a scanner and emailed it over, which was incredible. It was also incredible because the timing was such that I think it was PayPal or some other type of payment system. And we got this treasure trove of scores out right before there were all the sanctions where some of those payment systems were.
Right. Right.
So, so that was lucky. And so it was two different processes, but also what I uncovered with Julia Weissberg having this great career during her lifetime, but then having it sort of be lost to history, is that is sort of endemic with women composers, that they might have, and also women artists and other art forms as well.
Mhm.
They might have very strong careers while they're alive to promote their work and essentially while they can't be ignored. And then as soon as they pass, it's like they never existed, like their work was swept under the rug
Mhm.
because people are uncomfortable with, and if it's kind of out of sight, if they don't have to be confronted with it. This, I think society at the time was uncomfortable with a woman's genius.
Yeah.
And so we have this cycle of women creating, but then we forget about them only to have them be rediscovered 50, 75 plus years later. And why why we have to go through that process of rediscovery, and and why sort of women composers forget, they don't know their own history of what women composers came before them,
Mhm. Mhm.
whereas there's this line of male composers. It's like, okay, this my influence was this person who studied with this person who studied with this person, going back in this sort of in time. Whereas I feel that women composers don't have that sense of this sort of matriarchal legacy and lineage.
Yeah.
And that's something I would love to see restored, so
Yeah.
that each generation is not reinventing the wheel of of what came before, but that we have access to that lineage now.
Mhm. You said, I mean, you're in my introduction, it said that you actively promote women composers. So I'd love to hear you talk about the takeaways from your work on historic women composers. What should contemporary women composers take away from these things? What are your goals in promoting contemporary women composers based on the work on historical female composers?
I would like every woman musician, composer to truly know their own history and to feel that they are part of this legacy of women creators who came before. And I think that now is exactly the right time for that. And there are so many more opportunities for women composers now. And so that's where I feel that I can best serve the music community.
And that's so important because I think as a woman composer, I mean, I just accidentally discovered I could do this a couple of years ago, and it's opened an entirely new world for me, which has been very, very exciting. And actually, it's been, kind of opening the door to some other dreams I had that in a much better way than maybe pursuing those particular dreams, directly would have. Um, I feel personally that having this history adds depth and gives me more confidence and gives me some roots, to draw on, which I think is so valuable and so important. So I really love this work and the gift that you're giving us. And I just think it's really phenomenal. We do have, thankfully, so many more opportunities and to recognize maybe the doors that were open, by these historic women composers, even though we didn't know about them before. Now we do. So now we can see what went before and how we can build on that. And maybe it gives us more confidence to be a little bit more daring, perhaps, create some different things, experiment a little bit more. So I just really thank you for that gift. And I hope I speak for other women composers, regardless whether it's, you know, vocally, piano, whatever instrument, orchestral, all of that. Um, so I just feel that you have given a great gift to women composers, and I'm very grateful for that. I'd love to hear if you're willing to share some exciting new projects that you feel comfortable sharing with us, maybe for the future, a few months down the road, next year, just whatever.
So my other hat, so to speak, is as the co-president of the board of American Opera Projects.
Hmm.
And and we as a company, for the 30 plus years that the company has been in existence, have done so much to promote women composers and underrepresented composers. So it very much ties into kind of my personal work as a singer and researcher. And our next big project is we will be doing the world premiere production of Laura Kaminsky's new opera, The Post Office. That will be at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, in May. And with the actual premiere happening a few weeks before at Stowe Peak Art Center in Vermont. And this work just hits me on so many different levels. It's by, the composer is Laura Kaminsky, so just a groundbreaking female composer in opera. And the librettist is Elaine Sexton, who's a beautiful poet. And it marks the 250th anniversary of our country with an opera that's set in a US post office. So, and It's it's a drama between the post office workers, sort of centered around marriage equality, freedom of speech, and one of the characters is the sort of ghost or spirit of Benjamin Franklin, who was the first postmaster general. But as researching into his life, he was gay friendly at the time, and he also was the sort of founding framer who suggested that Thomas Jefferson make a change in the Declaration of Independence with the line, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." But initially that line was, "We hold these truths to be sacred."
Ah,
And it was Benjamin Franklin who said, let's change that from sacred to self-evident. And so this opera goes back to that. It discusses, the characters are responding to that. What is sacred? What is self-evident? What is our democracy, 250 years after its creation? What does that mean? And so I think it's an incredibly important and timely piece.
absolutely.
So I not only am I sort of part of the company that's producing it, but I will sing a one of the supporting roles in the premiere cast. So that's very exciting.
It is exciting indeed, and I can't wait to hear that. Closer to, we'll hopefully hear a little bit more about that and let people know how they can access that. It just sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm so excited about the trajectory of your career, your mission, which is just so unique and wonderful, and brings together so many aspects of your artistic life, which are just singular, and it's really, really wonderful. Um, I'd love to end with the question of what advice would you give? And this is, I guess, a little multifaceted. What advice would you give opera singers today, art song performers today, women composers today?
My advice would be to embrace making your own opportunities. When I when I realized that traveling, being on the road constantly as an opera singer, touring from production to production, was not what what was meant for me in life. I I sobbed in the bathtub, and but it opened the door to to my being open to these other opportunities that where I feel like I found my true purpose.
Mhm.
And and these opportunities really involved my finding and creating, and then finding collaborators and others to also believe in and support the project. And I would just encourage all all young musicians to be open to making their own opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think that's wonderful advice. And as a young musician myself, a young composer myself, I only started 2 years ago. I think that advice applies to musicians of any age. And it's never too late to pursue your dreams. And just building off of what you have inspired us to think about today is really fabulous. So it's been the greatest delight to have you as my guest today, and thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to do this.
Thank you, Lisa. But I wanted to end by congratulating you on your album. What are
Oh,
I
thank
listened
you.
to it. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I particularly enjoyed sort of diving into your sound world And then by the time we got to track 4, which I think was Breaking Down Walls,
Breaking the Walls, yes.
Breaking the Walls. Yes. I just thought Breaking the Walls was so beautiful, and I felt so kind of ready for it with the lead up of the previous tracks.
Thank you.
And so you really did a beautiful job, and I just wanted to congratulate you and encourage all of your listeners to stream it.
Thank you. That warms my heart so much. Thank you so much for that. Well, this is the end of another wonderful episode of Talking Shop. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode, and have a wonderful day.